Eli Turner was only 10 years old when he walked into the cornfield and ended Hannah Riggs' life with a single, chilling purpose, just to see what it felt like. In a quiet town that prided itself on safety and innocence, two children crossed paths in the darkest way imaginable, leaving behind a crime that would shock the nation and redefine what it meant to be truly evil. Millstone was the kind of town where people waved to each other from their front porches and children played freely in open yards until the sun dipped below the horizon. Nestled deep in Indiana's countryside, it was a place that had remained untouched by the chaos of the outside world. The community was small, close-knit, and proud of its peaceful nature. Crime was rare, an occasional break-in, maybe a fight at the local bar, but murder, that was unheard of. So when 8-year-old Hannah Riggs disappeared on a quiet September afternoon, it shook the town to its core. Hannah was last seen riding her pink bicycle just a few blocks from her home. Her mother had called her in for dinner, but she never came. At first, neighbors assumed she had gone to play at a friend's house and lost track of time. But as night fell and there was still no sign of her, panic set in. The Riggs family called the police, and within hours, the entire town was searching. Flashlights cut through the darkness, search parties combed the fields, and helicopters circled overhead. Her name echoed in the wind as volunteers called out in vain. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The following morning, a local farmer made a horrifying discovery while tending to his crops. Lying half-buried near the edge of his cornfield was Hannah's lifeless body. Her clothes were torn, and there were visible bruises on her arms and face. Most disturbing of all, her small frame showed signs of blunt force trauma, suggesting she had been struck multiple times. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of a robbery, and nothing to suggest this was a random act of violence. It was brutal, calculated, and deeply unsettling. News spread like wildfire. By noon, the local news had already picked up the story, and by evening, Millstone was the focus of national media attention. Residents were in disbelief. Parents clutched their children tightly. School was cancelled for the week. The local police, unprepared for a crime of this magnitude, called in outside help. Crime scene investigators roped off the cornfield while forensic teams began combing through the area for clues. The FBI arrived the next day, offering additional resources and expertise. What made the murder even more disturbing was the absence of a clear motive. There were no signs of sexual assault. Hannah's pockets were still filled with small trinkets and toys, suggesting robbery wasn't the goal. It was a senseless killing that left everyone grasping for answers. Who would do such a thing to a child? Why? And how had no one seen or heard anything? Millstone quickly transformed from a place of comfort to a town wrapped in fear. Strangers became suspects. Every unfamiliar car, every unfamiliar face, became a potential threat. Behind every closed door, there were whispered theories and quiet tears. And somewhere, hidden in plain sight, was the person responsible. A person no one would have ever expected. As investigators examined the crime scene more thoroughly, they discovered a clue that didn't quite fit the usual profile of a killer. Near the edge of the cornfield, just beyond the tall stalks, was a single sneaker print embedded in the soft dirt. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. But when forensics measured the size, they realized it was far too small to belong to an adult. At first, detectives assumed the print might have belonged to Hannah herself, but comparison quickly ruled that out. This footprint belonged to someone else, someone small, perhaps another child. The possibility that a child could be involved in such a violent act was almost too disturbing to consider, but it was a lead they couldn't ignore. Police reviewed hours of security footage from surrounding properties, hoping to catch sight of someone near the scene. Most cameras didn't capture anything useful, but one grainy video from a camera mounted on a nearby barn showed a shadowy figure on a bicycle headed toward the cornfield around the estimated time of the murder. The figure was small, the motion uncertain, and though the footage was too blurry to make out a face, it was clear that whoever it was had entered the area. Just before Hannah went missing, detectives began compiling a list of people who lived nearby and could have had access to the cornfield. They focused on young people, especially those who knew Hannah. At the top of the list was Eli Turner, a 10-year-old boy who lived 2 streets over from the Riggs family. He attended the same elementary school as Hannah, and although they were not close friends, they had been in the same classroom the previous year. When detectives asked around about Eli, they received mixed responses. Some neighbors described him as polite but odd, others noted he had few friends and kept to himself. A few children mentioned Eli had a temper. He would get angry over small things and once reportedly pushed another student into a ditch during recess. Eli's absence from school the day after Hannah was found dead was especially suspicious. When police visited his home, he answered the door alongside his parents. His demeanor was strange, calm, quiet, and seemingly unfazed by the investigators' presence. Detectives asked if they could look around his room, and Eli's parents agreed, assuring the officers that their son had nothing to hide. But what they found told a very different story. Tucked behind stacks of books in the back of Eli's closet were several of Hannah's personal belongings, including the small charm bracelet she had worn the day she disappeared. Even more damning was the discovery of a blood-stained aluminum baseball bat beneath his bed, wrapped in a blanket. When tested, the blood matched Hannah's. No one in the house could explain how it got there. That night, Eli Turner was taken into custody. The officers driving him to the station exchanged silent, unsettled glances. None of them could shake the feeling that they weren't dealing with a scared little boy, but something else entirely. At the police station, Eli Turner sat in the small interrogation room with a blank expression on his face. He didn't cry, fidget, or ask for his parents. Instead, he waited calmly as officers prepared to question him. Detectives expected confusion or denial. They anticipated a frightened child trying to make sense of the situation. But what followed stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Without hesitation, Eli admitted to killing Hannah Riggs. His voice was flat, his words deliberate. He said he hit her because he wanted to know what it felt like to hurt someone. His confession was chilling. He described the events with unsettling detail. He had followed Hannah after spotting her riding her bike near his street. He had taken a shortcut through the woods to cut her off near the cornfield. There, hidden from view, he had waited. When she arrived, he stepped out, holding a bat he had brought with him from home. There had been no argument, no warning. He struck her once, then again and again, until she stopped moving. He said he didn't feel anything afterward. Not happiness, not sadness. Just quiet. Psychologists were immediately brought in to evaluate Eli's mental state. They needed to determine whether he truly understood what he had done and whether he was capable of remorse. Over several sessions, Eli remained consistent. He showed no signs of regret. He didn't ask about Hannah. He never said he was sorry. When asked why he chose her, he simply said she was there. The lack of emotion, the absence of empathy, and the calm nature of his confession disturbed everyone involved. His family was in shock. Eli's parents insisted they had no idea he was capable of such violence. They described him as quiet, shy, and well-behaved. He had never shown signs of aggression at home. He got average grades, enjoyed reading comics, and played video games like most kids his age. But behind that seemingly ordinary facade was a darkness no one had seen coming. Due to his age, Eli could not be tried as an adult in Indiana. But given the nature of the crime and his own confession, the court moved quickly to have him placed in a high-security juvenile psychiatric facility. There, he would undergo further evaluation and remain under constant supervision. The judge described him as a danger to society, regardless of his age. The media exploded with the story. News outlets across the country reported on the boy who had committed a murder at just 10 years old. People were horrified. Parents questioned whether it was possible for a child to be born evil. Others demanded to know what signs had been missed and what could have been done to prevent the tragedy. As Eli was led from the courthouse to a waiting van, he didn't look scared. He didn't flinch at the flashing cameras or angry voices in the crowd. He just stared ahead, his face blank, as if the world around him no longer mattered. Inside the juvenile psychiatric facility, Eli Turner adjusted quickly to his new surroundings. The staff expected him to be withdrawn, frightened, or possibly violent, but he was none of those things. He followed rules, completed tasks without resistance, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. It was his stillness that unsettled everyone. Other children at the facility cried, screamed, or acted out. Eli remained silent. He was a puzzle no one could solve. As part of his evaluation, Eli underwent a series of psychological tests. The results painted a disturbing picture. He scored high in traits associated with conduct disorder, manipulativeness, lack of empathy, shallow emotions. While he was too young to be officially diagnosed as a psychopath, many of the markers were already present. He didn't respond to pictures of people crying. He didn't flinch at violent images. And when asked how he felt about killing Hannah, he answered, nothing. His drawings, discovered later in his room, offered more insight. They depicted dark, violent scenes, children with hollow eyes, people lying in pools of blood, and figures with weapons. The sketches were crude but purposeful. One page showed a girl on a bicycle being struck with a bat. It was clear Eli had been thinking about the act long before he committed it. Staff combed through his notebooks and found short stories he had written. In one, a boy lured another child into the woods and hurt them, then returned home without being caught. The similarities to Hannah's murder were undeniable. Teachers and counselors from his elementary school were brought in for interviews. They admitted to noticing odd behavior. Eli was often alone, rarely participated in group activities, and sometimes made unsettling comments. But nothing he had done before the murder raised enough red flags to warrant intervention. One teacher recalled him staring out the window during class, not distracted, but focused, like he was somewhere else entirely. Another remembered him snapping the leg off a class project model with a disturbing sense of satisfaction. His home life, on the surface, seemed normal. There was no history of abuse or neglect. His parents were devastated and overwhelmed, unable to accept that their son could commit such an act. They described him as a quiet, sometimes distant child, but never dangerous. Investigators searched the family's devices and online history but found nothing to suggest Eli had been influenced by violent media or peers. It appeared the darkness had grown from within. Despite multiple therapy sessions and attempts at rehabilitation, Eli remained emotionally detached. He showed no remorse, no understanding of the pain he had caused, and no interest in changing. Doctors concluded that he posed a high risk of reoffending if ever released. The court extended his stay at the facility indefinitely, with evaluations scheduled every year until his 18th birthday. While the world outside moved on, inside those walls, Eli lived in a world of silence, watching, waiting. He continued to draw, continued to write, and continued to show the same calm, cold demeanor that had horrified the nation. The question remained, what would happen when the boy who killed was no longer a boy at all? The name Eli Turner became etched into the nation's memory as the youngest killer in modern U.S. history. In Millstone, his story lingered like a shadow that never lifted. The town's once carefree charm had vanished. Parents clung tightly to their children. Playgrounds entered earlier in the evenings, and the cornfield where Hannah Riggs was found became a place people avoided entirely. Though a small memorial garden was eventually created in her honor, few could bring themselves to visit. It was too painful, too raw, a constant reminder of innocence lost. The national media followed Eli's case for months. Debates raged over How to handle a child who had committed such a brutal act. Was he a victim of a broken system? Was he born evil? Should he ever be allowed back into society? Experts were divided. Some advocated for long-term treatment, believing that with proper intervention, he might be rehabilitated. Others warned that his behavior showed early signs of a personality disorder too severe to treat. Inside the psychiatric facility, Eli remained unchanged. Year after year, during evaluations, he answered questions with cold logic. He understood what he had done, could recount the details without hesitation, but never once expressed regret. Therapists tried different approaches: play therapy, cognitive behavioral sessions, art-based healing, but nothing penetrated his emotional wall. He drew less often as he aged, replacing pictures with journal entries that were often vague, sometimes philosophical, but always distant. By the time he turned 16, Eli had become more articulate, more self-aware, and even more unsettling. He knew how to say the right things when needed, often mimicking emotional responses without ever showing genuine feeling. This manipulation became a concern for the staff, who noted that while he followed rules and remained nonviolent, there was always a sense that he was studying them, not healing. Meanwhile, Hannah's family had quietly relocated to another state, trying to rebuild a life from the ruins of their loss. They declined all interview requests, kept off social media, and asked the world to let them grieve in peace. Yet, every year on the anniversary of her death, small tributes still appeared at the site of the old cornfield: stuffed animals, flowers, hand-drawn notes from children who never knew her but had heard the story. As Eli's 18th birthday approached, anxiety gripped the town of Millstone once again. Legally, he could not be held at the juvenile facility any longer unless a judge ruled him unfit to re-enter society. Evaluators, after much deliberation, concluded that Eli continued to pose a serious risk. He was not violent in confinement, but his lack of empathy, planning behavior, and calculated nature remained. The court ordered his transfer to an adult psychiatric hospital under maximum supervision. Millstone never recovered from what happened. The memory of a child who killed another child shattered the community's sense of safety forever. Eli Turner became a haunting example of something people didn't want to believe could exist: a killer hiding behind the face of a boy. And even as the years passed, one terrifying thought remained: what if he had never been caught?